SEP Fanfic Readings presents 1,000 Words by Olive Juice 28.
Chapter 29. All Twisted Up. I can't reach it! Ow! Anthony, that's my eye! Don't move, you'll knock me off my dot. Oi, Thomas, spin it already! The chorus of exclamations and complaints had been going on for almost 20 minutes, punctuated by breathless laughter and good-natured groaning. If someone, say the headmistress, were to walk into the room at that very moment, they would find themselves staring at a massive jumble of arms and legs sprawled out in an odd, contorted positions across a bright, polka-dot mat on the floor. Nothing said house unity quite like crouching under or stretching over formerly unfriendly classmates, and yet that's precisely what was happening. Dean and Hermione had decided their housemates were ready to tackle the muggle game of Twister, and the results did not disappoint. They had originally taken turns, since the mat could really only hold 4 or 5 players at a time, but once everyone had gotten the hang of it, they decided to enlarge the playing space with additional dots so everyone could play together. Dean had made a concession to the no magic rule, so that the spinner would whirl with a flick of his wand, thus allowing him to join the game with the others. This was the second whole group round to be played, the first having been won by Luna, who seemed to have an unnatural flexibility in her delicate limbs. The winner of this round would then face off with her back on a normal-sized mat. The ethereal blonde was currently balanced in a perfect backbend over one of Neville's outstretched legs, her upside-down face resting on Padma's elbow. To everyone's amusement, Theo was one of the worst players, which was highly irregular. The lanky brunette had held the game night points lead virtually since the beginning, and had a competitive streak of Quidditch pitch wide, so his consternation at being awful at this particular game was extremely entertaining. "Left hand blue!" Dean hollered from his frog-like squat in the center of the mat. "No, no, no!" Daphne squealed and lost her balance, coming down on her knee and bumping into Hannah, causing her to fall over as well. Both girls dissolved into giggles as they untangled themselves and carefully picked their way over to the edge of the mat so as not to cause anyone else's elimination. "It's okay," Hannah grinned. "Now I can take some pictures." With that, she brandished her camera and began making her way around the perimeter, the shutter clicking away. "Right foot red!" Dean wheezed, his face turning slightly purple as he had spent several seconds now virtually upside down. Hermione glanced around and took stock of her situation. The only real way for her to accomplish this was to turn over into a sort of crab walk position. While she was carefully attempting this maneuver, Draco was calculating his own move without being fully aware of what anyone near him was doing. As a result, by the time the two players finished moving, Hermione was facing upwards, braced on both her hands and feet, and Draco was facing down, his tall frame stretched completely across her, his face mere inches from her own. "Well, hello," Draco drawled when he realized where he'd landed. His gray eyes sparkled with mischief, and he reveled in the pink tinge blossoming across his favorite witch's cheeks. While they regularly held hands and had exchanged a handful of kisses since returning to the castle, neither were particularly comfortable with blatant displays of affection in front of their friends, and they were still taking their relationship very slowly. The position they currently found themselves in, though, completely innocent, immediately charged the air between them with something more than friendly competition. "Hello yourself," Hermione let out a breathy whisper. She lost herself for a moment in the steel gaze fixed on her and forgot about how her hands were going numb and how close her head was to Anthony's backside. All she was aware of was the pounding of her heart and the smell of Draco's woodsy cologne, and the fact that his lips were very, very close to her own, and were slowly curling up in his trademark smirk. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the click of Hannah's camera and the whirring of the spinner, followed by Dean's voice as if from far away. "Left hand yellow!" The tension was broken, as several housemates collapsed like dominoes. Theo had tried to stretch his ungainly self too far, causing Padma to topple over into Anthony, who bumped backwards into Hermione, who lost her balance and landed flat on her back under a still perfectly poised Draco. "Looks like you really did fall for me." He grinned and winked at her as she rolled her eyes and huffed a resigned sigh of defeat. She, along with the 3 others who had been eliminated that term, carefully scooted to the edge of the mat. This left only Draco, Neville, and Luna to play. However, since Luna had won the previous round, she decided to forfeit the current one in order to gain an opponent. "You two continue on," she trilled airily as she flowed to a standing position and settled into a nearby chair. Dean spun the arrow again. "Ready, Neville?" Neville grunted from his spot on the mat, his legs crossed awkwardly and his arms behind him, bearing most of his body weight. Right foot green. Thank Merlin! Neville huffed a huge sigh of relief as he was able to switch to a much more comfortable position, similar to Hermione's last one. Draco, however, was not so lucky, and after several attempts, wound up overextending his leg and flopping over onto his stomach. Neville wins! Luna cheered from her seat, and everyone applauded and chuckled at the shocked expression that had crossed the gangly former Gryffindor's face. Didn't see that coming, he chortled as he stood up so Dean could shrink the mat back to its original size. Everyone except for the two finalists found seats around the edges of the multicolored game space, chatting happily and taking bets on who would win. The majority thought Luna would be the victorious, her agility far outweighing Neville's luck in any of the last round. As the game commenced, talk turned to upcoming events. Valentine's Day is just a little over 2 weeks away, Padma announced to the group at large. What would you lot think about doing something for our first years? Like a party? Daphne asked, her eyes bright with excitement. Why not? Padma shrugged. The Halloween bash was a huge success, and it would be fun. We don't have to go quite as big with the decorations, and costumes aren't necessary, but we could play games and have music. They really seemed to enjoy the dance party last time. Her suggestions were met with nodding heads and sounds of agreement, and even Neville and Luna called out in support from their precarious stances on the dots. She clapped her hands and beamed at everyone. Right then, we should start planning. Hermione, make a list? As the game continued and the upcoming festivities were discussed, Draco allowed his mind to wander just slightly off topic. Valentine's Day was coming up. He hadn't really thought about that at all, and mentally berated himself for it. Granted, he'd never had anyone to share the sappy day with before, and quite honestly had always thought it to be rather ridiculous. However, with Hermione in his life now, he found he really did want to make it special for her. He considered the traditional offerings of chocolates or flowers and decided those would not do at all. This would take some serious thought and effort, which he was more than happy to put forth. His musings were interrupted by the boisterous cries of his housemates. The game was officially over, with Luna somehow managing to keep her balance as she stretched across the mat in a half upside-down twist, with most of her weight resting on one hand. Neville, it seemed, had made a desperate attempt to stretch further than was wise, and wound up flat on his face. He was a tremendously good sport, regardless, and was quite content with the 3 points Dean awarded him as a second-place winner, while Luna took 5. This put her only 2 points below Theo, the closest any of them had come to reigning champion since well before the holiday break. Catching up to me, Lovegood, Theo drawled as he considered the pretty witch still standing on the polka-dot mat. Might just have to keep my eye on you. He winked at her and gave her a lopsided grin, which she returned with a beaming smile. Go right ahead, Theo, she responded sweetly and floated off toward her chambers. Hermione glanced up at the knock on her door, which was partially open, and saw Hannah standing on the threshold with one hand behind her back. Hey, Hannah, come in. Hermione sat up from where she'd been relaxing on her bed while reading the latest chapters for her Transfiguration class. I have something for you, the cheerful former Hufflepuff announced with a smile. She whipped her hidden hand forward and held what looked like a small white rectangle out to the other witch. Hermione took it and turned it over, realizing at once that it was the photograph. Looking at it, her breath caught in her throat, and the longer she studied it, the warmer her cheeks seemed to get. She met Hannah's eyes and found twinkling mirth there, an all-too-knowing smile twitching at the corner of her mouth. Hermione swallowed with a bit of difficulty and looked back down at the image. Thank you. This is... She couldn't quite find the right word to describe how she felt about what she was seeing, but Hannah seemed to understand. Oh, it's pretty amazing, isn't it? I was quite captivated by it myself, but I figured you would appreciate having it for yourself instead of me tracking it up to the photo board for everyone else to goggle at. She gave a soft chuckle as Hermione's blush started creeping down her neck and up to her ears. Hannah pushed off the 4 posters she'd been leaning on and headed back toward the door. See you at dinner, yeah? If you can tear your eyes away. She gave another friendly laugh and exited, leaving Hermione to continue to stare at the picture in her hands. Hannah had captured a moment during the housemates' recent game of Twister that was currently robbing Hermione of the ability to form intelligible thoughts. It was a snapshot of the few seconds that Draco had been stretched across her during the second round, when their eyes had met. Hannah had zoomed in so that just their faces were visible, and the angle she had managed to take it from displayed Hermione's profile and Draco's full visage. She had also developed the photo magically, so the small scene played out repeatedly. Image Draco's eyes met Image Hermione's, and a small smile tugged at one corner of his lips as he spoke. Her lashes lowered and rose again as her eyes roved his face, and her cheek turned up in an answering grin. There was nothing intentionally seductive or overplayed from either of them, and yet the heat emanating from their interaction was tangible. There was a level of familiarity and intimacy visible that made Hermione feel like she was intruding on a private moment, even though she was one of the people she was looking at. At the time of the actual encounter, she had gone a little fuzzy as she stared into the gray eyes she had become so familiar with over the last several months. She hadn't registered much of anything beyond how good he smelled, how close he was, and how much she loved the little half-smirk he often pulled. Now, looking at his face as he watched her, she saw something more. There was a depth to his gaze that she hadn't noticed, more than just friendly banter or light flirting. She wasn't entirely sure what she would identify it as, but it made her heart flutter and her cheeks burn. She fought the urge to fan her face, thinking that would be far too dramatic. However, she did stand up and started pacing around her bed, feeling like she needed to release some energy. She knew she liked Draco. A lot. She also knew she found him to be attractive. Extremely so. She knew he liked her, and as he told her on several occasions, and his actions proved it. But that look. She wondered if he felt more strongly about her than he was letting on, which in turn made her wonder about her own feelings. They had agreed to take things slowly and just enjoy getting to know one another, and she was consistently more intrigued and more comfortable with him the closer they grew. Deciding that she might be reading too much into things, and not wanting to disrupt the entirely enjoyable status of their current relationship, she took one final look, one rather long look, at the photograph before placing it carefully between the pages of her textbook and heading out to the common area for dinner.